Hey everybody, it's Steve Tantric Dex, and this is a tutorial video on how I like to use Izotope Ozone 5's mid-side mastering reverb function to get a really beautiful, lush sense of space to the masters. So let's open it up here. Okay, so to toggle between Ozone's different functions, you just hit the pad to the left of each area. And so we're going to head to the reverb and make sure that you have this power button selected to activate it. And there's a few different areas that we're going to be working with here. So the default is this button right here. The default is the stereo. So we're going to make sure that we click it. So it brings us to this mid-side mode. And we're going to do something slightly different for the mid and the side function here. And I'll show you that in a second. So first things first, for those of you who do not know what mid-side processing is it's a different way of working with mono audio information and stereo audio information. Mono being the mid and stereo being the sides. Okay, so we're going to process both of those slightly differently. Traditionally, stereo information is dealt with in a left or right manner and fashion, so we're doing something a little bit different here. Other areas that we're going to be looking at is this dry-wet fader, the decay time, and this big window up here, which has two functions. The first one is the decay time. It gives us a visual of our decay time when we're measuring our so we can measure our reverb visually. And this box here activates our high-pass and low-pass filter. So as you can see here, I have a high-pass filter already activated. So what that does for me is it cleans up the reverb signal. We don't want any reverb happening in the low end, because adding reverb to your low end, especially if you're producing electronic dance music, can really muddy up your mix. And for things like kick drums, snare drums, and basses, they really need to be upfront and punchy. And having some reverb on top of them can sort of wash them out a little bit and push them back in the mix, and we don't want that. So I have it high pass filtered, and it's something that I check using the solo wet function, and I just find the sweet spot and use my ears, and just to make sure that there's no muddiness happening in the reverb tail itself. The solo wet function allows us to monitor just the reverb tail without the original signal playing in. Okay, so the idea is that we use just a pinch of reverb. It's not something that should be really obvious or dramatic in your mix. It should be really, really, really subtle. So subtle to the point that it should be pretty undetectable for people. It should be something that's sensed more than something that's very clearly audibly heard. Okay, so that being said, we're gonna do this very small baby steps here. So we're gonna take a look at the decay time and the wet mix fader here. Okay, so we have the wet mix fader turned down very nicely. Okay, so let's take a listen to that reverb signal again. All right, so I'm feeling like it sounds good with the dry wet in the mids at 3.9, and I like to have the sides just a little bit higher, and I'll explain that when I get to the sides. Okay, so for the mids first, I like to have a shorter decay time as well. So I'm just going to bring that down a bit. The default is 1.0. So we're just going to bring that down a tad so it's not too dramatic. We still want a little bit, because if you're producing electronic dance music, then it's really important to consider that a lot of sound systems are in mono. A lot of big club or music festival sound systems are in mono. So by adding this reverb effect to the higher frequencies of our mono section, it allows that to translate very well. Now, I like to add just a little bit more in the sides, like I've mentioned, because this is more for home stereo and more of a radio. Almost gives it like a top 40 type lushness to it. I hope I don't turn some of you off by saying top 40, but it makes it sound really, really beautiful and professional sounding is what I was really meaning when I say that. So most of the time, your music is going to be listened to on a stereo as opposed to mono sound system. So that's something that's really important to recognize too. It's going to be things like your average Beatport shopper and things like that. So it's really important to stay competitive in terms of audio quality. And I really find that the side function of the mastering reverb in Ozone 5 helps us do that. So that's why I like to have just a little bit of extra lushness added to the dry wet, the wet mix fader, and I keep the decay time a little bit higher. And once again, I have this high pass filter cut pretty high. It's up there in the 2 kilohertz area. So that, my friends, is how I like to add this beautiful lush sense of space to my masters using Izotope Ozone 5's mid-side mastering reverb function. Okay, love you all. Thank you so much for watching.